In higher ed, we're all looking for big wins, but reducing a 75% application abandonment rate and achieving a 90% conversion rate, that's next level transformation. Michael Battersworth, CMO at Texas State Technical College, shares how they achieved this by streamlining the application process with Element 451.
Our Element journey began out of a necessity. We were switching to a new SIS, and the application process was going to pose some real usability issues for us. We felt that application was going to hamper our enrollment. So we began quickly to evaluate different CRMs, different applications. So for context on that, our conversion rate with the prior application had about 75% abandonment of people clicking apply to submit. And the first weeks after going live with Element, we saw an 80% conversion, and that's now up to 90. So improving the usability of that application on the front end process has had a significant advance in our intake.
When technology works for students, it works for you. Visit element451.com to see how simplifying the application process with artificial intelligence will lead to significant results for your institution. Welcome to the Hired Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell, Community Engagement Lead at Pathify. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology. The Hired Geek Podcast is a proud member of the Enrollify Podcast Network, a robust collection of shows designed to help higher education professionals like you grow every day. Explore all of our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 263, with Kaitlin LeMoine and Julian Alssid of Workforces. They have a podcast that I've been privileged to be able to help produce for the past about year and a half now, talking with a lot of amazing leaders. The work that they do with this podcast and with their consulting work is kind of at the intersection of workforce development and higher ed and local government, state government leadership, public policy, sustainable jobs and the jobs of the future and future work, all that good stuff. So really appreciate being able to bring their voices into Hired Geek Podcast. Go check out their show. So please do enjoy this episode number 263 with the Workforces crew.
First, thanks so much, Dustin, for having us on your show. We're really thrilled to be here. I have spent the last 35 years involved with workforce development, and I have had the opportunity to work with and for each of the key stakeholder groups involved in workforce development. Understanding that this is a multidisciplinary undertaking that requires, at the least, educators and employers working together. And so I've taught in school, I've worked at community college, I've worked with business organizations, I've done policy, I've done practice, I've worked with ed tech companies. And I've had the opportunity to be at the forefront of some of the innovations in the field. So Workforce Strategy Center, a consulting think tank I founded and ran, wrote the original report that talked about career pathways as a framework. And then I met Kaitlin at Southern New Hampshire University, where we helped to build what we called College for America, an online project-based, competency-based model that still stands today as, I think, a real pioneer and leading model in the field of competency-based education.
Great. Well, as Julian said, Dustin, thank you so much for having us on the show today. We're thrilled to be here with you. So I feel like I always say, do I start in the middle or do we start in the beginning? Because Julian and I met in the middle, but I'll start at the beginning and say that I spent my whole career in education, ranging from the K-12 space, where I designed service learning and project-based learning programs for high school students in the Boston area, transitioned over to the nonprofit space, where I worked with a program building out a model to serve first generation to college families, specifically geared at how to pay for college and save for college, and built out sites in the greater Boston area, and then transitioned over into higher education. Julian, as you mentioned, we met at Southern New Hampshire University, where I designed competency-based education programs as part of the College for America model, and also worked on the workforce partnership side of the house to design learning solutions aligned with the needs of the university's employer partners and with industry. So as far as some themes that kind of crossed my career and my interests, been focused on scale and how to design authentic, transparent skill development programs that really serve learners beyond the classroom, right? So whether that's college or the real world. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, well, yeah, I appreciate you sharing, because I know just like, I think like cliff notes or like portions of each of your backgrounds, and I love just sort of like kind of widespread, like kind of diversity of what you've all have worked on, and certainly like the like workforce development pieces. I just feel like I've been giving myself like a crash course, certainly just like working a little bit more with you all and just sort of observing what I feel like has been sort of accelerating trends or interest, or just like coming from a lot of different areas around like workforce development. So, because yeah, obviously it's like a very kind of cross-functional approach that does involve, educational institutions, employers, and, just other stakeholders, whether it might be like a local or federal government or whatever else. Like, it's just very intricate, complex, but important work. And I just feel like I was coming into it maybe a little bit late, or maybe it was a little bit naive, or as a layperson. And you all have been some of the people that have helped give me that crash course and kind of educate me. But just for other folks who may not be aware, Kaitlin, if you want to explain a little bit about the work that you currently do, because I think that'll be helpful to sort of set the stage that you all are bringing obviously so much experience and so much expertise and perspectives onto our conversation today. But explain a little bit more about the work that you all currently do.
Sure. Yeah. So Julian and I joined forces, no pun intended, a couple of years ago in the development and build out of the Workforce's consulting firm, where we offer two things. We offer our consulting work and we offer our podcast. And really our work is focused on closing gaps, whether that's for learners, education providers, industry, and for various stakeholder groups. So through our consulting work, we focus on designing alternative work and learn models, facilitating system level change, and aligning education and training with industry. Our clients range from higher education institutions to ed tech providers to industry associations. And on our podcast, we seek to amplify the good work that's being done in this future of work and learning space, which, as you acknowledged, Dustin, is a very complex space and ever-changing space. And so we're thrilled to offer that podcast in order to really put a spotlight on the great work that's being done. I'll turn it over to Julian if you'd like to add additional detail there, though.
Yeah, well, all I would add really is that, so workforce development, as I said, is this multidisciplinary undertaking. And it's kind of not what we were set up to do. Like, educators did not largely sign up to be workforce developers. And employers didn't sign up to, have to work with people before they even show up to cultivate their careers in order for them to do their jobs. And with rising skill demands, this becomes more and more challenging. And the biggest challenge is that building collaborations within and among the various stakeholder groups, it's kind of nobody's day job. And so as a result, too much of what we see in workforce development are initiatives that are, come because of some visionary leader and or someone who has grant money, and they go away with that leader and when the grant runs out. So our work is all about how can we support in our consulting role, how can workforces support leaders that want to really have transformational impact and almost become an extension of them and help them first kind of from a distance, do what's nobody's day job and help them then build the capacity and figure out how do you practically get from where you are today to transformation within your organization and with your partners. So whether it's a higher ed leader, an ed tech leader, an employer group, we work with them all because they're all struggling with the same issue. And sadly, we really haven't moved the needle on this, which is why, as Kaitlin said, we're focused on closing gaps. And these gaps are massive. And there's, we believe, political will to close them. And there's will among stakeholders to close them, which is great.
Yeah, I kind of want to elaborate on that point a bit in my next question, but just sort of like my reflection is like, I came up through a very traditional education path, like, as an RA in undergrad, that sort of turned me on to like working professionally in higher education, got my master's, and, was working on campus as a student for a really long time. And I've just reflected a lot as I've now spent most of my career in ed tech and doing a lot of like side projects on sort of the outskirts and stuff, is just this sort of complexity and like what it takes to operate these little cities of campuses, like all these sort of like external partners and things, and all these other factors that sort of like influence campus operations and campus life and everything. Like, it's just not, a lot of it isn't talked about at all. And then like a good portion of it just isn't talked about enough. It's maybe just sort of acknowledged in passing. I'm just sort of like, obviously like, yeah, there's like, all these policies federally or whatever else, that sort of influence higher ed. But so, yeah, I'd like the idea of people signing up for the work, or it's like not like, anybody's day job and everything. Like I can sort of appreciate that, especially I guess like educators for sure. But like you're saying, like it can nowadays, I feel like come from any of the sort of like different angles. It may be that sort of transformative, like institutional leader who's looking at it as sort of a way to sort of elevate their brand or kind of increase their sort of scope of their campus and their student population, or whatever else, or better serve that student population. Or it could be, like a governor or a mayor, or this, like it could just be like any of these people could be like the one that's driving it. And then it's like, okay, how can we make that more sustainable and sort of long standing and not just contingent on like this one person or whatever. We'll stick with you, Julian, to at least start for this next question. Is like I said, I feel like it's at least my perception. And I don't know if it's just like I've just become more aware of it. So I feel like it's like, oh my gosh, this is like a trending topic or whatever. But like, do you feel like that political will and some of those other factors, like, has it been getting more prominent now? Like the, workforce development and educational institutions working together. Like, is that more prominent now than it has been maybe in like the past decade?
Oh yes, it's way more prominent now, and there's so many factors feeding into this. We've touched on many, but it's sort of it's disillusionment with the high cost of education. It's competition. It's the rising skill demands. It's the advent of AI, and it's the changing nature of work post COVID. It's virtual versus hybrid versus place based. It's really complicated. And so, I think so for various reasons, employers are struggling because they can't find talent they need. And they've been saying that for a while, especially employers in kind of new and emerging industries or industries that have transformed, like manufacturing, where there's a perception that these are, oh, don't go there. Grandma lost her finger 30 years ago, or the factory went to Mexico. When today there's some beautiful clean room with great jobs that with a short-term targeted program, you can get onto a career path. People don't know about this stuff. And at the same time, educators are struggling too with, like they understand that the jobs today do require what a good liberal arts education teaches, for example, ability to solve problems, work in teams, think creatively, and so on. But they also require an ability to apply yourself technically, like everyone needs to. I mean, you're recording in Riverside. You had to learn how to do that here. You're a liberal arts grad, Dustin. And so there's this convergence of all these elements, and the workforce people too. I mean, workforce development, historically, the workforce system was all about just getting someone a job. And for years now, that's really morphed into helping someone get onto a career path. So we see around the country the emergence of career pathways and sectoral strategies. And, even in the outgoing Biden administration's work around the Recovery Act and the CHIPS and Science Act, and even with incoming focus on short-term Pell. And, there's a lot of movement on multiple fronts that involve workforce and education working much more hand in hand.
I guess really quickly before I go to you, Kaitlin, like, yeah, I think like the idea of just people are at any number of places of like their comfort level with technology, or like, yeah, certainly maybe like preconceived notions about like a manufacturing job or whatever. And I guess like try to find those ways to like ingratiate people, whether it's just sort of like dissuading them of these like outdated notions, or just like, what do we need to do to create an environment that feels really welcoming and supportive to bring people in? It's, yeah, just like one kind of reflection. But Kaitlin, yeah, I guess like any of your sort of perspectives on like sort of the change of like putting more sort of like emphasis on this within like the past decade of like how it's become more prominent.
Yeah, I mean, I think Julian, raised a lot of great points. I mean, one thing I would add is just, there's an inherent connection between education and career, right? And so like when we look at job descriptions, more and more job descriptions for entry-level roles also say require experience. And so how are learners, from a learner perspective, what does it look like for them to apply for a job if you've gone to a 4-year program, but don't have the experience to back it up? What does that look and feel like? And what does that mean? And what are the implications for higher education institutions to build in more of that experiential career-based component into their academic programs or as part of the academic experience? So I think inherently that's been one shift we've seen pretty steadily over the past, even Julian, as you said, even since COVID, where, there is this shift happening. It feels like it's not going away, and learners are concerned about it, right? It's like, well, I want to be sure I'm job and career ready when I leave this program and can demonstrate what I know and can do for my first job out of college. And then just really quickly, I would reflecting on your point you just made, Dustin, about there's this component of upskilling, right? What does it look like to continuously upskill and educate oneself, and recognizing that a move toward continuous upskilling is the direction we're going. And really the skill set like underlying that is like learning how to learn, right? Like learning the right questions to ask, learning when you don't know enough and should find some additional training or get some additional experience. So yeah, I think we're operating in a really exciting, but a really complicated moment, and one where the silos of higher ed and industry are coming together.
Yeah, well, because it makes me think too, just like, because obviously the acknowledgement of AI being like a sort of new thing that people are wanting and needing to learn more about, like that has been one sort of catalyst. But then like, I feel like I've reflected a lot, like, and kind of kept tabs on like these offerings that again have come from a variety of different sort of places, but with like solar panels, like people installing those, and again, like it's a fairly skilled thing. Like you don't need a bachelor's degree to be able to install solar panels, but like there's a lot of demand, like people are interested in getting them for their houses and all that, like, and getting the skill set to do it and different things like that. Like it is that idea of like, how do we tell people where that is offered, make that feel like it's a welcoming, supportive opportunity for them? And then like that idea of like, certainly there's going to be some political will of like, are we funding this in a certain way to either cover it entirely for certain people, who do need to like reskill, upskill, whatever else, or maybe at least like subsidizing it or something, or whatever else. But like that idea that like that only happens when, folks like yourself are helping to like maybe close those gaps, but just like that there may be that transformational leader at an educational institution or in a local state government, or, so maybe even like a solar panel company where we're like, hey, we want to encourage this. Like, how can we like find people? Like we're an employer, we want to, hire people. We just can't find them. Like people here do not have the skills, but like, we're finding this being like a good environment to try to, sort of make these partnerships happen and stuff. So, I don't know. So I think like there's just been a lot that I've been like reflecting on recently, just generally seeing this feel like a much more trending topic, a lot more prominence put on it by, a variety of stakeholders and things. But the one thing that sort of inspired my next question that I'll start with you, Kaitlin, for this one is like driving around in my home state here of Delaware. Like they have some workforce development offerings that they're like advertising on billboards and stuff. So I was like, I see it just the route that I drive every day. But then I was like worried of like, if you don't drive this route, like you might not see it, because I don't know, maybe it's plastered somewhere else in like a billboard, but like I don't know how else they're getting the word out, if they're using any sort of like TV advertisements or social media ads or whatever else. So I just thought about like, oh my gosh, yeah, I mean, like you could make this amazing program that's like super relevant, timely skills, amazing funding opportunities, supportive environment and all that, but then like nobody knows about it. So then it's just sort of like crickets and tumbleweeds and whatever. You're just sort of like, why isn't anybody coming here to like take this program? So Kaitlin, how do you see like effective marketing playing into like the effectiveness of workforce development efforts?
Yeah, I mean, marketing is key, right, to effective workforce development efforts. And I think so much of it goes back to really knowing who you're looking to reach, know who your end user is, right? Know who your learners are, and making sure that the communication and the message is getting out to them. And so with respect to the billboard on the highway, right? Like that's one example, but we live in a day and age where certainly web-based, there's so numerous ways to get the message out, but I think it's more, where are people going to see it? So ensure that message really reaches the people you're looking to reach, and also being clear about whose job it is to message, because I think what can happen sometimes in these cross stakeholder initiatives, it's like, whose role is it to put this message out, and how do we ensure the message is consistent and timely and has the most critical information in it to attract, as you're saying, right, attract more people to a given program, but also to just to make the message clear about even what that program could lead into, right? Like what are the pathways available? Where could you jump from that one opportunity to the next?
Yeah, and just to add to that, so big part of where we sit, and kind of going back to this notion of closing gaps, right, is that the good jobs, there are many really good jobs that with kind of a short-termish targeted training, you can get onto a really good career track. And many of them involve alternative pathways and work experience and apprenticeships. And a lot of these, for example, we spend a lot of time now working with higher ed institutions and their partners on manufacturing and life sciences. And you talked about solar and these fields that are new fields. And from a marketing perspective, for many of the higher ed institutions, like for example, many community colleges around the country have engineering programs that for years have just not had a lot of pickup. Engineers tend to go to 4-year colleges. And many of those community colleges now are focusing more on workforce development, like shorter term trainings. We're actually working with a college in Massachusetts on this that are aimed at helping people pretty quickly get onto a track where there's a real career for them in, say, CNC manufacturing or quality control, where you can start at a job that pays, $40,000, $50,000 a year with upward potential, and people don't know about them. And so not only do we have to think about the complexity of the marketing and, defer to you, Dustin, as an expert in that field, but it's also like, how do you take an institution that doesn't even have maybe a positive reputation with respect to manufacturing at this point, or isn't even seen as a go-to resource for employers or for people who are looking for careers, to somehow now market themselves with their partners in a way that is accessible to people who can benefit from these careers. And again, this is why we're in the mess we're in, because people don't even realize all these opportunities that are available to them.
Struggling to make sense of endless research? At the AI Engage Summit, you'll get a hands-on tutorial and meet Notebook LM, Google's AI assistant that transforms complex information like academic papers and lecture videos into content that will engage your target audience. The event is free and virtual. Register now at enrollify.org/engage. Right. Yeah. Like just the lack of awareness being seen as like, well, I guess people either like don't care or don't want this or whatever. And then it's just like, yeah, again, like earnestly people are looking for ways to be more gainfully employed and have more sort of career pathways. And I think kind of what you're saying, like, I think being able to recognize in the way, like how you're messaging something, sometimes it is going to be more valuable to lead with like the institution. Like they're going to put a really positive halo effect on sort of this offering. People are going to see it as credible and sort of something worthwhile. But other times it could be like, okay, well, if like, yeah, a certain local employer is involved with this in some way, like that idea of like, well, we're just like offering ourselves as a place for people to sort of like be apprentices or sort of do some experiential learning opportunities. Like we're not guaranteeing people jobs, but they're going to be very well positioned for jobs. But like, you could put that logo on there and people are going to be like, oh my gosh, yeah, like I've seen that. Like I know a lot of people that work there, they love working there, or they're just sort of like, they have like maybe a more positive, or at least just people are more aware of them than they may be of like local community college or something else or whatever. Like it could be like, okay, well, let's put both of them up there equally, like the size of their logos, or one more than the other, or like, whatever else. Or then even how you're maybe just like targeting like, with like social ads or something else. But I mean, I just think in my mind, it is just that idea of what you're acknowledging, like this is a problem. It needs to be come at with a very intentional sort of effort of, who are we trying to target, why and how, and then like trying to do it more consistently. Because I think like, I do appreciate the effort. I do like you're saying, like, I think it's part of the solution. Like, okay, you're plastering a billboard out there. Obviously, you kind of are limited to how like, how much information or the kind of information you could put on something like that. But trying to, I think do sort of a multimodal approach, but even just like don't overlook the utility of trying to just like, do sort of like shoe leather kind of politicking or whatever. Like just try to like put like the little things in people's like doors and stuff where it's like, we are here for you, local person. Obviously, like if you're doing like digital ads, you have to obviously, create some like parameters to like hyper target around into like a certain area. But it's like, okay, well, just do everything everywhere all at once, like just like really don't leave any stone
Right.
unturned, because I think like that idea that you can try to start that conversation to get people thinking about like, you know, getting a better job, just kind of in air quotes, but then also like doing that while you're also like building skills that are just going to give you more options or more sort of like, career options long term. Because like, I guess like another personal reflection, I remember hearing this like, this has to be like over a decade ago, but like the idea of like the advent of iPhones and smartphones and touchscreens and everything that like, and I think that's where like we've had to kind of play catch up a lot in America, is that like in China, why they were dominating it is because they had a lot of people with just the right amount of like engineering skill. Like when you said the engineering, it like triggered for me again, like the idea of like cutting and placing the glass on smartphones, like using that machinery and doing whatever else, like it's just like slightly skilled enough. And they had enough people getting those skills quickly in China to be able to like manufacture these like, in demand electronics and everything. So like, it's just that idea of like, with like the CHIPS Act, whatever else, it's like, and it is sort of the unfortunate things that a lot of stuff like takes time, but like trying to harness, maybe if you're seeing in your local community coming from some, whatever angle it might be, like that willpower, that willingness, and that sort of focus on trying to like connect those dots, bridge those gaps and everything. But like, yeah, I think it's like these are all the things I think to be aware of. But I think for me, yeah, it is just sort of like my day-to-day being dominated so much around like, content creation, marketing, sort of like that sort of thing. Like I was curious your all's perspective, and I think it just is a good sort of like blind spot, I guess, to be aware of. But so as we're winding down, I think the other part of it, obviously, like just giving this episode sort of its due diligence around sort of education leaders, the institutions and everything. Again, like we've talked a lot, obviously, they're a core part of this sort of formula here, bringing together a variety of folks for workforce development. How have you seen, we'll start with you, Julian, like how do you see education leaders being effective partners to this work? So I think just to like go a little bit deeper on this, because obviously like education institutions are the teaching partners. Like they are likely going to be the ones that have the instructors, have the knowledge and, sort of space and tools and things to like teach people things. But like, if you can give maybe any sort of anecdotal examples or just sort of elaborate on like how these institutions can be effective partners to like your work in particular.
Yeah, well, they are, as Kaitlin said above, I mean, our workforces works with the leaders, many of whom are educational leaders who want to drive this work forward. And first of all, educational institutions our educational system is formidable. These are rich, maybe not as rich as they'd like to be, but these institutions bring a wealth of resources, of capabilities, of facilities, of obviously academic know-how, and often technical know-how, and they're integral to their communities. And so educational leaders are in a position to convene. They're in a position to push in new directions. They're in a position to really meaningfully connect their institutions to what's happening in their workforce, and they're connect their institutions to what's happening in terms of workforce development and economic development too, I might add, which are integrally involved. Historically, too much of this work has been boutique in nature. So all these people come together and, 5 people get trained. And then, as I said, the grant goes away or the leader goes away. What is key for these educational leaders, and, we've touched on it quite a bit, just even with your interest in marketing, is to really figure out, what do they have currently that they can build on? Is there a department that's doing something well? But then B, how can they bring the right players in their institutions to the table so they can begin where they are, get some early hits, move in a direction? And Kaitlin can speak much more to this because she's really the sort of design build expert. But how can they begin to build initiatives that can be scaled, that draw in the right players in their institutions and operationalize their visions so they can be scaled and grown, and to do that in partnership with their employer and other partners. So absolutely there's a role for them. And in fact, I would say they're the most important driver of this work because they have both the interest of the learner in mind as paramount.
Yeah, I mean, Julian and I, a number of months ago now, wrote a blog post about, this concept of workforce development versus talent development and how we were thinking about like workforce development and education, why are they considered separate? Why do we talk about them separately? They're inherently interconnected, and more so, as we've discussed, right? This is a theme that's becoming ever more apparent, that like these worlds need to coexist and build upon each other. And so I think as we engage in this work with our clients, I mean, we're seeing that we need to leverage the best of all worlds. We need to bring together the skills that employers and facilities that employers can bring to the table, the abilities, interests, and resources that higher education institutions can bring to the table, and workforce providers, same, in order to kind of leverage the best of what everyone can offer in order to build effective programming, whether it's workforce training or apprenticeships or career connected type learning opportunities. So yeah, I would say that it's all interconnected, and education leaders and institutions are integral to this work.
I was also going to add that, given that we're all podcast partners here, Dustin, and full disclosure, Dustin produces our podcast, Workforces, which you can find at workforces.info on Spotify, Amazon, and wherever your favorite podcast service is located. But what I also wanted to add, because I feel like it's really important, and also, by the way, Dustin, as our producer, it occurred to me, you are the one person we know who has listened to every one of our podcasts. So honored.
That's right.
To have you as our one listen, hopefully more than our one true listener.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say is the other key, I think, really key role for education leaders is joining our podcasting world, is being able to tell the story to their peers. Part of what we find in education that's so challenging is, people don't want to hear from outsiders who are not educators, who are not in it. Like, dude, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. The leaders who are innovators are the ones who need to be on the podcast, who need to be telling the stories, who need to be marketing this, who need to be taking the lead, and who need to be able to articulate how they got from here, from starting point to where their vision is carried them.
Yeah, I mean, that, like, just the kind of bold underline, like, I've appreciated that you all have sort of like opened yourself up to be like, shining a light on the stories and the people and the organizations, like through your podcast and everything. And that's like where, I mean, like so much of my learning has come from over, the recent past and everything. So I really appreciate that opportunity to be listening through to every episode, because it's like, because I think I remark on this a lot in a lot of different areas, is that like, obviously, like, all of us only have so many hours in the day and kind of thing. It's like, it could be where it's like, I don't know if I necessarily would have listened to every single episode, like, if it just was sort of like out there or whatever. But it's like, and I've thought about this with like classes in school. It's like, I don't know if I would have taken this class, but I'm so glad I did, because I learned so much. And I think it's like, I'm like always reflecting on that to continue to try to be open to like those times when it's like, oh, I don't know, is that for me? Should I spend time on that? It's like, sometimes it's like, if you're right on that edge, it's like, nope, listen to it, check it out, like watch that video, listen to that episode, because you're like, there's something, like, follow that thread of why you're sort of like, because obviously sometimes you're just seeing stuff and you're just sort of scrolling past or whatever. But if you're sort of like, wait, hold on a second, like, oh, who is that? What was that guy on that show or whatever? Like, what were they talking about? There's like some interest, but it feels like maybe you're like not supposed to, like, air quotes, like, just with like stuff out there sometimes, like, oh, is this for me? But it's like, it's obviously out there for anybody. Like, it's as much for you as anybody else. So yeah, I mean, like, you all have just been doing such a great job of like curating that, because I think it is like, as much as if it's marketing, workforce development offering to kind of like, make it more sort of aware to people, accessible to people, welcoming to people, like, just this work in and of itself, making sure that it's sort of demystified, people are sharing success stories, or just sort of like, trying to model and lead the way. Because I think like the idea of, for me, like, just reflecting kind of anecdotally, is that for educational institutions, I think it does feel like, like they're these venerable institutions. They've been so autonomous and, kind of insular. Committing to something like this, I would not be surprised if a lot of them would feel like they're sort of like sacrificing something or giving up, like, giving up control, or sort of like, this sort of exclusive sort of like, well, we're like the ivory tower. We're sort of like, we do what we do it our way, and that's it, or whatever. And it's like, oh, we're sort of like bending the knee or something to like all these external partners. It's like, all right, let's try to like show that that is not the case. We're all sort of working equally. Like, you have something so valuable to contribute. You're a valued partner and stakeholder in this work. You have the learner's needs in mind. Like, we need that. We need you. We need you to be a part of this. And like, because it could be like, if the other sides are sort of outweighted, it's like, again, it's just not going to be as effective as if it's just this employer and the state saying like, we need to get more people to install solar panels. And it's like, okay, yeah, again, like you could maybe get a couple people to sort of like nibble on that, but like you need this institution to maybe like give the space, give the educators, give just any number of other resources to support that work. So been just one big portion of kind of the increased prominence of this work is that like for any number of reasons, educational institutions have just sort of like finally moved past their sort of outdated notions about being a part of this, because I think certainly like community colleges have been doing this for a long time and been very successful in it. Now you're just seeing like so many different types of institutions being open to it, which is very reassuring to see. So we will leave it there, and appreciate the call out to the podcast, because please, like, again, it's been such a point of pride for me to be a part of helping to elevate these stories, being kind of on the back end and producing. I think that's a great way to obviously just kind of keep the learning going, keep the conversation going. So listen to that show, connect with you both, and connect with Workforces as the organization, obviously, that you're doing this work through. Just really appreciate you both. Appreciate your time. Appreciate all that you do. Just really great chatting with you for this episode.
Thank you so much for having us, Dustin. Always so great to connect with you. And thanks for all that you do.
Yeah, so right back at you, Dustin. Thanks so much, and hope you have a fantastic 2025.
The Hired Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances you'll like all the other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing constantly, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better hired professional. Our shows help you find your next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your host. Learn from people like Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Day Kibbolds, and Eddie Francis, as well as so many other of your favorite leaders in higher education. Enrollify is made possible by the support of Element 451, a leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.